Hello, and welcome to this edition of the Florida Writer Podcast, a discussion about writing and other things. Today, I am lucky enough to have with me Obi Umeozor. Obi, why don't you tell me in 60 seconds who you are and what you write?
Okay, all right, I'm Obi. I'm Nigerian. I grew up in Nigeria. I moved to the States 4 years ago. I write fiction. I started out writing poetry. For some reason, I drifted into fiction because I felt it better represented the stories I had to tell. But I mostly write short stories, coming of age stories, because there is something fascinating about them. That loss of innocence, that moment wherein you see life for what it really is. I'm working on a novel at the moment that tries to capture that in its essence, about the character stuck between two worlds, being American and being Nigerian. But I think by the time I'm done with that, whenever I'm done with that, I think I'll be able to move on to other things. At the moment, I'm also interested in screenwriting as well. But for now, I think I have an obligation to write this story or write this novel, and then that will be my ode to literature, my first love, before I move on to any other thing. So yes, that's what I am in a nutshell, and I'm glad to be here.
Well, we are certainly glad to have you. And you're writing a coming-of-age story of a person who is stuck between two worlds, that of American and Nigerian. Are they living in two different countries? Are they experimenting in different cultures?
Well, the character himself came to the U.S. with his father to seek asylum because his father was being sought after by the military regime. But then we're living in Florida, but then he finds something pointed him back home to find his mom, who he hadn't seen since he was 7 years old. So it becomes a quest of sorts. But in trying to find his mother, he finds himself, if you will, and in a sense rediscovers his country, whatever that means. But that's essentially what it is. But is someone that's transplanted throughout much of the narrative, which is non-linear, by the way, between Nigeria and Florida and back home.
You also dabble in dark humor. What can you tell me about dark humor?
No, I think I think dark humor is something I've always been drawn to. Even if it was with regards to my taste in movies or just general entertainment, really. And I think it's only recently I started to examine that taste, because I was asking myself the other day, wait, why am I always drawn to this kind of stuff, like really darkly comic kind of stories? But yeah, just something that's always fascinated me with dark humor, how it's able to find levity or humor in the most unexpected spaces and in a way that doesn't undermine the weight of the story. And I've always wanted to explore that, and both in my writing and in my examination of other works that make use of it successfully.
You've got to explain the difference between dark humor and comedy.
Oh well, I think comedy is just comedy has one goal really, which is just how do I get at your funny bone? How do I get you to laugh and laugh until you crying? And think comedy is more focused on the effects of the narrative on the audience more than anything else. And you get a sense with the comedy, if it doesn't get the audience to laugh, then it could have said to have failed in its primary objective. It is, in a sense, getting your audience to laugh as much as possible. But with dark humor, it's much different. Dark humor is, in a sense, use of humor, but in a different kind of way, in a way that heightens the story, the irony in the story, or the weight of the tragedy, if you will. So with dark humor, using comedy or comic elements is for a completely opposite purpose, really. It is not just to get the audience to laugh, but to get them to see just how traumatic, if you will, that particular incident is. So you might watch something or read something that is darkly comic, and even though you have your moments of laughter, the weight or the tragedy or the trauma of the story isn't lost on you. If anything, it is heightened. So that's like starkly different from comedy. With dark humor, there is a coming together of both tragic and comic elements. But with straight up comedy, it's just how do I make you laugh and laugh until you're doubled over? Caddyshack comes to mind.
Yeah, Caddyshack does come to mind, doesn't it? Or all of those National Lampoon movies, and
Yes.
they just go for they go for one laugh after another. But do you need to be a master of irony in order to write about dark humor?
I don't think so. I don't think you have to be a master of irony, but you have to be attuned to it. I feel. I think um, if that irony is lost on you, you might not be able to successfully inject that humor into the story, into an otherwise tragic or traumatic story. I think having that sense of irony, or at least an appreciation of it, makes you very aware of what you're doing with the comic element in the story. If that isn't the case, then it would come off as tasteless. Like you might inject a comic moment. Maybe as you're writing it, it jumps to you and you're like, and you just inject it in there. And it might upend what it is you're trying to do with the overall narrative itself. So yes, some appreciation of irony is necessary. I won't say a mastery of it, but at least an appreciation of what irony, of how irony plays a role in your narrative.
So you are currently working on your doctorate at the University of Houston, and you had started at the Florida State University's creative writing program. What do you think are the
Yes.
differences between the two places? They're both in warm, moist climates, and I'm
Yes.
just curious about the whole experience going from one place to another.
It was it was a bit of a culture shock because I moved to the creative writing program in Tallahassee straight from Nigeria. Like my brothers were already here in the US. My family lived in North Carolina in the 80s, but I'd never been to the US before. And so like my eldest brother told me about the creative writing program at Florida State. And at that point, I'd already made up my mind that I wasn't interested in any 9 to 5 job kind of stuff. I just went to so he was like, "Oh, you can send your short stories to I don't know, it's creative writing programs in the US. Because if you get in, it's almost fully funded, almost always funded if you're able to get in." So I sent a story, and Florida State accepted it. But moving to Tallahassee was I don't know, it was strange because it was a very different idea than what I had of America. I don't know. It's a small town. It's a college town. I was expecting, I don't know, something big, like I don't know, the New York you see on TV or that kind of stuff. But Tallahassee is like super small. But it was very helpful to me because they have a very rich literary community and it's a close knit community, and you're able to it nurtured in a lot of ways nurtured my growth as an artist and as a writer. I was able to focus on what's important, and the program at Florida State is also really really solid. But it's like I said, it's almost a closed off, close knit community, really small. But then moving to Houston is a vastly different experience because Houston is sprawling. You have a very diverse, enormous literary community. There's always something happening. The biggest writers, they always come here on their stops on book tours, which is something that didn't used to happen in Tallahassee. So it's something I'm still getting adjusted to here, wherein you have such a sprawling community of writers here in a way that wasn't there in Tallahassee, and it's beneficial in its own ways as well because you're exposed a lot more. It's almost like, well, maybe Tallahassee was kind of like nurturing you, but Houston throws you in the deep end, and then you kind of have to figure out your way. But it's a lot of people know outside Houston. I don't think enough people know just how much of a vibrant literary community there is here, and I wish that weren't the case. But yeah, it's been an adventure so far, and I'm enjoying it so far. I'm having fun.
And you are putting together something called a Grackle and Grackle workshop. What is that about?
I'm teaching a Grackle and Grackle workshop this fall, starting September 2nd of September. But it's Grackle and Grackle is a creative writing community, a literary community here in Houston. So they always host events and consultations and teach workshops. So they reached out to me to teach a workshop. I'm doing that. It's called Of Axe and Pyramid, conceptualizing and rethinking the shape of your story. And basically it's just a craft workshop wherein discuss the shape of the fiction. And I think that's really important. I think a lot of writers spend a lot of time, infusing their stories with all this the glamorous aspects of the story. For example, like characters and plot and setting and all that. But in doing all that and packing as much events you can into a story, sometimes the structure is left lacking. So, and I feel that structure, that skeleton that holds the whole story together, it's very, very important. It's probably the most important part of the story. And I watched this video. Kurt Vonnegut had this short video lecture called "The Shape of Stories," where he like maps out certain shapes of most classic tales you can remember, and he gives a lecture on how that's vital to it. So I was thinking maybe it's fun to build an entire workshop around that. And I feel with practicing or reading stories that have very admirable structure and practicing how to infuse that in your own stories, it becomes second nature. And if you're able to master that, then everything else falls in place. Because no matter how colorful or how memorable the events in your stories are, if it's not backed up by solid structure, it falls apart quickly, really quickly. So yeah, that's what the workshop is about. Grackle and Grackle.
Are you an advocate then for the outline versus the seat of the pants?
I think I'm somewhere stuck in the middle. I mean, jumping on, going with your inspiration is admirable and whatnot, but at some point you have to fall back on that structure. How I usually go about it is having an elementary idea of where your story wants to go at the very beginning, and don't allow yourself to think too far ahead. Let the story lead you where it will, especially with that first draft. I feel with the first drafts, you can run with that inspiration, let it flow. But then with subsequent drafts, then you can try to build some structure into it. But then again, once you master, and by mastering, I mean reading both stories with good structures and stories with bad structure, both of them teach you just as well as each other about good structure. But I think doing that enough and mastering that, even in your first draft, you're already structuring your story subconsciously in a way that you might not even really be aware of. So even as you're going with the inspiration or privacy or whatever, even as you're going with that, subconsciously, your mind is structuring that story as it comes out on the page. But that doesn't happen if you don't master how the structure works, how to structure a decent story, if you will. For example, you get to the end of the story and you look at that character and you're like, oh, this is the exact same person that was at the beginning of the story. What changed? What was the arc of change, for example? What is different about this character at the end than was at the beginning of the story? Because I think that's very elementary. If you find your characters at the end of the story in the same place they were at the beginning, then the question then becomes, what is the point of the telling? What is significant about what has gone on in between? You know?
So you like to build a scaffolding for your characters so their arc can take them from point A to point B.
Point A to point B, exactly. And that's, I don't know, growth. And that growth could be either positive or negative. It could be, yes, but there has to be some change, some growth, some progression. From a good place to a bad place, or a bad place to a good place, there has to be some change.
Well, Obi, that is very fascinating. And how could, oh, pardon me, hold on. Obi, that is very fascinating. How can people get in touch with you?
Yeah, so I'm on Twitter, at Calvin Umeozor, CALVIN and UMEOZOR. Although on Twitter I just mostly retweet stuff and make terrible dad jokes. But I'm also on Instagram at CALUMEZ. That's Calumez. I'm on Instagram. I think I'm way more active on Instagram. But yeah, that's one way to get across, get in touch with me, or by email, at Calvin Umeozor, UMEOZOR. Yeah. Have any questions or anything, yeah, I'm easy to reach sometimes.
Easy to read sometimes. Well, are
Yes.
you ready to switch now to our rapid fire questions?
Yes, I'm excited.
Do you know how to drive a stick shift?
Oh yeah, I learned with stick shift, the Toyota Cressida in
I imagine in
1992.
Nigeria, most cars are created with a stick shift.
Yes, although back then, yes, but now just a lot more shift towards automatic. I mean, there was just this perception that if you learn to drive with a manual, you can drive anything.
I believe that. Today, people don't know what to do when they get in a car and there's a stick shift in there. I've saw an ad or a meme one time that said it was a theft deterrent. You have a stick shift.
Yes, yeah. That's something of yeah. I although now I imagine like, oh, sometimes I just like to do road trips, 10 to 12 hour road trips, and sometimes I think, oh wow, this would have been a much more arduous journey if it were a stick shift. Like you're changing every few minutes. Like that's just too much work.
Too much. And what is your favorite day of the week?
For some reason, Friday, not for the obvious reasons, but just the looming weekend is just very calming on a Friday morning. Oh shit, I don't have to wake up early tomorrow morning, so I could just while away my morning with coffee and pretend to be productive, but ultimately not be. But yeah, there's something really tempting about Fridays. Mondays is by far the worst.
I think you and about 3/4 of the population would agree with that.
Yes.
And lastly, do you like to fly?
Of recent, no. I think that's just me getting old. But when I was a lot younger, it used to be exciting. But now, like the last trip I took from Phoenix back to Houston, it was horrible. It was like there was a lot of like, yeah. And then when you watch a lot of movies with characters that's scared of flying, it starts to rub off on you. So right now I'm in between and leaning towards just not flying again for a long time.
I understand. I have been on many, many flights, some good, some bad.
Yeah.
And I've watched many movies, although I tend to take a book and if the flight's long enough, I can finish it from start to end.
Oh yeah. Oh wow. It's pretty cool.
Well, Obi, thank you so much for stopping by. You have been listening to another episode of the Florida Writer Podcast.
Thank you. That was awesome. That was fun.
Allison out. Obi Umeozor received his BA in English from the University of Port Harcourt, Nigeria, and taught English literature before moving to the States in 2015, where he obtained an MFA in creative writing from Florida State University. His work has appeared in the forthcoming New Orleans Review, Adda, and others. He has been shortlisted for the Commonwealth Short Story Prize and nominated for a Pushcart Prize, and is currently a candidate for a PhD in fiction at the University of Houston's creative writing program. Thank you for listening to this edition of the Florida Writer Podcast. For more information about the Florida Writers Association, visit us on the web, floridawriters.net.